Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to In Time. Sorry about that sound issue, and I'm getting an echo, so let's see if... No, that's my fault.
Well, I mean, we knew that already. Question is, are you going to fix it?
All right, so, if everyone could just give me 1 second here. Oh, there's always something. You know what? You should have known that there was going to be problems when we actually started on time. That was the sign. All right, I think we've got everything under control now. Thank you so much. So, all right. Presumably everybody can hear. If you can't, let me know. But I think we are in the clear with everything. We were just talking literally in the background about how just like spectacularly awesome the intro music was, and of course, none of you were able to hear that. So what that means is we're going to play that intro for you again right now because it is literally that. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. We're going to go forward with the show. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter, and most of you not only know that, but if you hadn't figured that out, you'd have figured it out by the failure of the sound in the first 30 seconds of the show. With me tonight is our co-host is Andering and Commander Lance McMillan. Gentlemen, how are you?
Doing great.
I'm pretty good. Pretty close to Memphis, Tennessee, and not Louisiana, in Mississippi. Visiting the Deep South today.
Yeah, I swear to God, every time I call, the first thing I have to ask is where he is, because it could literally be anywhere in the country and sometimes even outside of the country. All right, so today we are going to do part 2 of our breakdown of Peter Zeihan. On our last one, we reached a couple of conclusions. First, that I am incapable of properly pronouncing his last name. Second of all, that he is very intelligent, has a considerable background in this material and seems to have earned his pedigree, and that he is successfully able to bring a lot of facts to the table on this. But we also felt that he was sometimes guilty of hyperbole and a level of self-confidence in his views that we did not feel were justifiable. First of all, gentlemen, do you think that accurately reflects your views, and did I miss anything?
No, I think that covers it.
Broadly speaking.
All right, perfect. So what we are going to do now is cover his views on China. Now, he said something which is pretty typical of him, we're learning. Maybe a little hyperbolic, maybe not, we'll see. He made the claim that China will not last the end of the decade. He suggested that actually he believes it will probably fail within the next 2 to 3 years, but even if it makes it and hobbles past that, it's not going to make it to 2030. So he gave some very specific reasons why, a very long, detailed explanation as to why. So we are going to get into that tonight and see what we think of it. So without further ado, let's start in and see what he has to say.
Specifically, 40% of the...
Oh, yes, please.
I want to preface something before we started in on this. Number one, this is a talk he gave in June of last year. And he makes a number of predictions, which you will see haven't
we'll discuss.
Quite come true.
That's an excellent point. So thank you.
Yes. Right. For those who would like to pursue it, there is a more up-to-date version of this talk that he gave that's about a month old, where he kind of tweaks his predictions, I think is the best way to put it.
Yes. I think. Thank you for that. So this is 7 months old. He makes a number of predictions. I think we're going to end up having to discuss where those predictions landed. You had said this last time, and I think this is true, which is a lot of times he makes these predictions, and there's nobody really around later to say, "Oh, well, wait a minute, you said X, Y, and Z." And I think if he's going to make claims as bold as he makes, without any equivocation or hedging, guarding, anything like that. I think he needs to be, held account to it. And if he doesn't want to be held to account to it, that's fine. That's great. I think then he should, be a little more academic and a little more modest in his claims. And I don't see him doing that. So, that's very important. Thank you for bringing that up. The other thing, oh, dear Lord, there was something else.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, unlike the previous one where he was talking about Russia and Ukraine, where I feel I have some degree of in-depth knowledge, particularly because a lot of it relates to the current military struggle that's going on. This particular talk is much more about agriculture and economy and things like that, and I'm on much
demographics.
Demographics. I'm on much squishier ground in this area. So I'm going to not be anywhere near as critical or forthcoming with, this is what he really means to say kind of stuff this time.
Another very important point, I think I am there too. He makes some claims that I'm going to push back on reasonably significantly, but especially when he gets into the agriculture, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. You there?
Yeah. Yeah, no. I'm just trying to figure out if there's anything I can say, and I know what corn is. No. I know what corn is.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting is remember where this particular talk is being given and who his audience is.
Where was this talk given, sir?
About halfway through, it becomes very obvious he's pandering to his audience. He's giving it in Iowa, and I think this is what is called the Iowa Swine Day or Swine Week or something. It's basically hog farmers.
Yes. Yes, and you'll note he does pander to that audience a bit.
It's a lot of time talking about pigs.
Well, yeah, he gives a lot of talks to like business consortiums, business interests, investors, investment brokerages. He gives a lot of that's where most of his talks are, which is I think where he gets some of his bold brashness in a lot of his predictions, because you start getting into the investment sphere, and it's like you have to kind of move with boldness, whether you're right or wrong, and you just hope that you're right more often than you're wrong.
Nobody wants you to equivocate when they're saying, "Should I invest $100,000 in this?" Well, yes or no. Goodbye. I'll get somebody else to tell me yes or no. Thank you.
Well, and that's business. The people in business don't. That's one reason they don't like scientists, right? Because scientists are always like, well, to within a degree. Where they're like, no. There's a lot of money on the line. Tell me yes or no. It's like you can't get one from science. Okay, we'll wait until we find a scientist who'll tell us yes or no. So, good observation. All right. I am going to stop. I have a couple of stop points I already have mapped out that I'm going to do. I know you gentlemen probably already have a few. It's almost twice as long as the last one we did, a little less than that. But since I think we'll probably have somewhat fewer comments, we'll probably take about the same amount of time. And with that said, let's go.
The world's potash comes from Belarus and Russia combined. Raw potash next year. This year, we're going to lose 4 to 6 million barrels a day of Russian crude, and it will never come back.
This is his
we
previous
have not priced that in. Yeah, here's a minor nightmare. The world's #1 wheat exporter has invaded the world's #4 wheat exporter. Will never be an exporter again. Disruptions to the flows. One more minor issue, and then we'll get into the big stuff. This was always going to be the last decade of the People's Republic of China. Let's talk about the third most important reason why. We are having government collapse. Chairman Xi has instituted a cult of personality far tighter than any world leader in history, including Mao, including the Chinese emperors of old, including Donald Trump.
False. I'm going to stop right there, and this is one that bothers me. This is one that actually bothers me a lot. That is patently false.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
I agree.
Mao murdered at least 10 million people and was responsible for the deaths of between 40 million and 80 million people, more than Adolf Hitler, more than Joseph Stalin, by quite a bit. And his cult of personality was so strong that it's been more than 50 years, and people are just now starting to say, ooh, that might have been a bad idea. There has never been a cult of personality in any recent history more than Mao. Now, he has just said a claim that I don't think any historian, anybody who's looked at this could think is even remotely defensible. I don't think there's a defense to it. This isn't even close.
Even if you ignore historical precedent, I think if you look at the current precedent of just North Korea.
Oh, that's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Xi's cult of personality is minor compared to that. Nobody has Xi claiming that, he invented television and the internet and, the sun shone for the first time in 1,000 years over Mount Ouagadougou because he was born on that day or something. And that's the kind of nonsense you're seeing with North Korea. So this is another case of extreme hyperbole.
Well, and that's what's important to note. Is he lying? The answer is probably not. And the reason is I know for a fact he knows that the statement he just gave is not true. But he doesn't need that statement in order to make the case he's about to make. The case he's about to make necessitates that Ping is a cult of personality and a strong one. He needs that. I think he can clear that bar. I think that's true, and I think he can clear that bar for the purposes of... So, what's he doing here? It's hyperbole. But it's, in my view, reckless and irresponsible hyperbole, and it makes it very difficult for me as an intellectual or intellectual. I don't know. We may have an idea on that before the end of the show with any luck. It makes it very difficult for me to take him seriously because it's like I know for a fact he knows that's not true. It's not even it. There's no bridge to that claim. Yeah.
To me, it's worse because he doesn't need to make this claim. It doesn't help his additional arguments coming later. This is throwing the turd on the dinner table and hoping to get a response.
Yeah. I think it's somewhat a showmanship. It makes him sound better. I think he's doing it as a presentation gig, not a honesty gig.
I think you're right, and honestly, that concerns me because he's discussing a lot of intellectual topics, and intellectual integrity is supposed to come first. But I'm also a guy who, goes on YouTube and is I get it.
I was about to say, I know you prefer that, but you have how many followers? How many does Peter Zeihan have?
All right. Two things. One, that's really fucking low. Two, you're not wrong. Okay.
What's that saying? The truth shall set you free. But first, it's really going to piss you off.
Do I still have discrete control over the NDI? Can I shut down individual feeds here? We just lost his Xandering.
You revoked all of my privileges and teams, so you can kick me out at any time you want, and I can't sneak back in.
That's right, I can now. That's an interesting consequence of that thing that I had nothing to do with, but haven't yet reversed either. All right.
Right along.
Let's stop derailing about, all the ways in which Xandering's a certifiable nightmare and get back to this.
I have to remind you every once in a while, you're starting to say nice things about me.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, that was funny too. He has intimidated into silence or imprisoned or executed everyone within not just the CCP, but the broader system who is capable of independent thought. He no longer has advisors. No one wants to bring him information because they don't know how he's going to react. He has literally shot the messenger so many times that he is making decisions in the dark. Now, this has horrible implications for any economic system, but in a one-man show, it means nothing gets done unless the leader gives you a written order, or you're one of the zealots who sees him on TV and is like, oh, this must be what he meant.
I'm going to pause here real quick. We've discussed Russia a lot, Commander, you and I think he's got some truth to this as it applies to China, but this sounds a bit more even like Russia. Do you think this would be more apropos of Putin or of Ping?
No, I think this is him. See, I think that the key is that in Russia, Putin has created factions that each rule their own private fiefdom, and they get to make the decisions when they're until and unless he disagrees. That's not so much true in China. China, it really is, he's the decider, and everybody has to bring him anything to make that call on, rather than make the call themselves. Because if they do make the call themselves, even if it goes well, he's still going to question why they did it.
Okay, so rocky start, but he's now on track, I think, does that sound fair?
I think that's accurate, yeah.
So when you see a small army of bureaucrats in head-to-toe surgical stuff out on a runway at an airport with a leaf blower spraying lime to disinfect the runway, that's the kind of policies we're getting out of China now. And of course, COVID. Now, we're in the Midwest. I'm going to guess that there is a diversity of opinions in the room about COVID. Some of us would probably side with vaccines, where others of us think that natural immunity is the way to go. And I think in the privacy of our own homes, when the door is closed and no one's listening, we do think to ourselves, maybe the other side has a point. Okay? Is that safe?
All right, we've been pausing a lot. I guarantee you once we overcome the hurdle here, we'll pause less. But I wanted to pause for this. I've listened to a lot of the things he said. This is my favorite thing he has ever said. I thought this was spectacular. It was humble. It was also still somewhat funny, and it was true. And I think if we had more discussions like this, I think would have a lot less angst in the U.S., and we wouldn't be facing the most divisive time ever since the Civil War. I think what he said here was just brilliantly done. It was humble, and it was just like, I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong, but I love this. It's my favorite thing he's ever said, and it unbelievably well done.
Yeah.
China doesn't have these options, and it's not because of government. China was very successful for 2 years at keeping COVID out. No one has natural immunity. And the Chinese domestically generated vaccine doesn't work. It barely worked against the wild strain out of Wuhan, but then we had Alpha and Delta and Omicron B and Omicron Threat Confucius 7 or wherever we are. It doesn't work at all versus the new stuff. And Omicron B, the one that is dominant in China and dominant here today, it's the most communicable virus pathogen that humans have ever struggled with. And the death rate from it is higher than any of the previous strains. And for us, this is a footnote because we all have multiple sources of resistance now. But the Chinese have none. And if they opened, you'd be looking at 5 million deaths in China a month for at least a quarter, minimum. So they can't. Lockdowns are their only policy tool. Shanghai went into lockdown on April 1. They came out on June 1. They nearly went into lockdown again last week. It's a little touch and go right now. We're all familiar with Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas totally leaves Vegas if it's a venereal disease. Yeah. China right now is struggling with an outbreak in Macau, which is their Vegas. So you should be expecting major metropolitan lockdowns across the country within a month. This is China's new normal. They can no longer participate in manufacturing supply chains because they can't keep the factories open.
Pause for one minute here. This was 7 months ago. There have not been a lot of lockdowns. There have been some threats of lockdowns, and most of them have been met with fierce resistance, both from the people and from the government. So this has not really panned out in quite the same way. I did forget to mention earlier, so let me just mention this quick. We are simulcasting this. This is on both In Time and Overtime. Overtime is our new sister channel. Our simul streaming really frustrates our head mod, so I'd obviously like to keep doing it as much as I can, but I'm aware that it's a little confusing to our audience as well, having that bot always show up. But we have to get that channel to 1,000. As soon as we get that channel to 1,000, it can monetize. It can do the same things that we can on In Time, and things get a lot easier for us. Why are we doing this? We've split it so that people who are interested in news can go to one channel. People who are interested in interviews, stuff like that, can go to another one. That's it. It makes it real easy for everybody. If you would like to super chat, this is what got me thinking about. We have a super chat, so I'm going to go check in on that in a minute. If you'd like super chat, has to be done on In Time. Overtime is not monetized. But like, subscribe. If you like the content, if you think we do a good, balanced discussion on Zeihan, and if you learn something and you have friends that you think would want to learn something too, share. It's one of the best ways to help us out, and we hope you will do that. Go to In Time if you want to super chat, and please do drop in on Overtime and give us a share. Someone just asked, does it matter where you watch it? Watching on Overtime probably helps a bit. Once it hits 1,000, also has to hit a certain number of watch hours. My suspicion is we're going to hit that, but either way, it probably doesn't matter. We need the subs more than anything. Thank you all for your support and help. I know you're not here to listen to this, so I'm going to go back to it. What I do want to say is this is a prediction that I'd give him a D- on this one. He's right in that they did kind of try to. They ended up not doing it because the people really rebelled, and I think the government needs their support more than it has in a while.
Yeah,
so,
well, I mean,
yeah,
they did start doing this, but then they got such a backlash because there were, especially of a couple very public incidences that happened. So they kind of started, and then they had some really bad problems cropped up, made national news, and there started to be a huge pushback against lockdown things, and they dramatically backed off the lockdowns.
Well, and so that kind of highlights my objections to some of the things that he says, though, which is, on paper, what he said made a lot of sense. In reality, I think this was an objection that you gave earlier, Zandring, too, where you sort of said, like, there's so many things you can't factor into this. You know, a defender of his could easily say, look, he'd have been right if the people hadn't have reacted that way, which nobody could have really predicted. I would not have predicted it, and may have not been predictable. But having said that, because there's unpredictable, that's why you always say there's caveats, there's possibilities. He's talking as if this is an absolute certainty, and the reality is he was close. And the reasons it didn't happen may have been sort of beyond his ability to predict, but this was a D- prediction in my view.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense from an academic view. I mean, if you just look at this from an academic view, what he said makes sense and looks like it would have actually continued. But then the damn real world stuck its head into everything and made things vastly more complicated with things that were tied in that nobody even expected to be tied in, and it changed everything. So, I mean, I think that's one of the big differences in a lot of the things that he speaks so confidently about, because he's viewing it academically, not with all of the messiness of the real world involved as well.
I think that's well put. I think that's exactly right. And truth be told, too, if I was somebody who was paying for his if I was a businessman who was going to make decisions based on what he says, I'd rather him express some lack of confidence, so I know just how much his confidence, what level of confidence he has in his predictions. Aaron Colson, $10 super chat on In Time. Thank you so much. It really does help. We get demonetized a lot. You notice we played Walking in Memphis earlier, which is a song that I just happen to like. You play a song like that, you get demonetized. We get demonetized anyway, and our head mod Titan at one point said, if you're going to get demonetized anyway, why not just play whatever the hell song you want at the beginning? I was like, you know what? Good point. That's why we can play it, is because we're going to be demonetized anyway. That's why super chats really matter, and that's why likes, subs, and views matter a lot too, because we're not going to get it through advertising. So Aaron Colson, $10. Thank you so much. China's push for global citizenship seems to be a step in the direction of transhumanism or push for global authoritarianism. Are the rank and file of the CCP altruistic or authoritarian? $10. Thoughts, anyone?
No, I think authoritarian, absolutely.
Yeah, I have no doubt that they're authoritarian.
I mean, there are gradations of that term. I think you have to understand that as an entering argument. Some of them are more authoritarian than others, but the general gist of it, the thing that got them where they are today, is that authoritarianism.
Yeah, and I don't see that changing. I think Ping is very aware of social media, of what other governments think, and I think he's good at pandering to that. He does not have the level of misinformation and sort of the weaponization of misinformation that Russia does. He can't compete on that level, but he is good at coming across as, and take a look at, and we talked about that peace deal that they put forward. You know, it's like stroke of genius. You know, it's like, we want to help, we want to be on the, and it ends up being, as Macmillan pointed out, entirely self-serving. And there's no way by putting that deal forward that they lose. The worst case, and they win no matter what happens. So, yeah, I think it's going to be authoritarian either way. They just happen to be quite good at, they're good at coming across much more globalized and ready to interact with the West than I think realistically they are. So, all right.
They are prioritizing health. That comes at a cost. Now, they're going to be losing access to Russian crude because of the war. They're losing access to manufacturing and employment because of their health policy. And we're having government failure as a managerial issue. All that really leaves is food security. Now, we all know that they love their pork. And we all remember African swine fever from 3 years ago when they had to cull more hogs than the rest of the world has hogs commercially. Now, they've started to get back in. Well, they've done more than start. They've offered a series of subsidies at the federal and the local levels in order to encourage hog farmers to re-enter the market, but they forgot to abrogate the debts of the hog farmers that went out of business because of ASF. So you've got 2 million dudes like me taking subsidies who have no idea what to do with a pig. And so they're buying food from everywhere in the world, even if it's not appropriate for hogs. So obviously they're going for soy and corn, but they're like getting broken rice out of India and like croissant grade wheat out of France to feed to pigs. Like the least efficient way to do it. And again, 2 million people who have no idea what they're doing. Now, according to Chinese statistics, there has been no ASF in the country for months. She gets it. Yeah. You look at a heat map of where the cases are in East Asia, and like all the borders are like red. But in China, it's everything's fine. They're probably in the midst of a fairly significant outbreak again. The question is how far and how loud does it get before they have to do another absolutely top to bottom mass culling. Whether that happens this year or next year, I don't know, because Chinese data, but we know it's coming. And if they don't have pork, all they've got left is rice. Rice is the most phosphate input intensive, phosphate is the crop that needs the most. Rice is the crop that is most phosphate intensive. Wow, that took like 4 tries. And so the Chinese have traditionally been the world's largest producer and exporter of phosphate because it's a food security issue. Well, they've stopped all exports until further notice. So we've lost potash because of the Ukraine war. We've lost phosphate because of Chinese mismanagement. Let's talk oil. This is total investment from all state and all private into all oil and all natural gas globally. And back in 2014, a narrative took hold in the financial centers of the world that fossil fuels were done. By 2030, we're going to be off of them. And since it takes 3 to 8 years to bring a field online, and another 5 to 15 years to break even, why in the world would you put your hard-earned money into a fossil fuel project when you will never get it back? Now, there's a lot of things about that line of reasoning that are wrong in my opinion, but it took hold. And over the next several years, total investment into the space dropped by 2/3. So lesson number 1 from that, takes 3 to 8 years to bring a new field online. If we triple investment today, we don't get back to 2019 prices until 2025, if we start today. Now that's what's true for the whole, the average. That doesn't necessarily hold true for each individual circumstance. This is by far my favorite graphic series. I like to call this the checkbook map, because every dot is someone who can pay their power bill. That's where the world's oil and gas comes from. This is, in one picture, a lot of the angst of the last 70 years. It's just, it isn't convenient to where we live. And getting it from A to B, that's part of the angst of the global system. Now watch North America. Watch Saudi Arabia. Here's where the shale is. There's 20 odd things about American shale that are fundamentally different compared to conventional energy. I think this is the most important one, at least for the moment. For us, only for us, we produce it where we live. And yeah, the Texans are gonna bitch about having to get it across state lines, but it's not like you're going to central Siberia. This is easy, this is a good problem. Also, it doesn't take 3 to 10 years to bring on a shale field. It takes 3 to 8 weeks. Now,
Hello? Uh-oh.
No, I muted myself, of course. Why I wouldn't be. You had said the French, the Germans, something, so I wanted to pause it so that I could. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at the map, he says we're the only ones that have shale where we live. Except if you look, there's stuff in Europe, the Baltic states, Denmark, a bunch of those people as well.
And South America
he is right.
Pretty well, yeah.
If you look at China, not so much. You look at Russia, not so much. You look at the Middle East, not quite so much.
Africa's not doing pretty good either.
Unless you're South African.
Or the,
Boy, talk about a country that really won big in the resource allocation lottery.
Now, the U.S. did really too, but South Africa is the only country that I know that competes.
Like, well, you get 2 and you get 2, and let's give 20 to South Africa. Yeah, they get.
The other thing I want to point out, and this is interesting, and I've had this discussion with reasonably well-educated people, and one of them too said, "Well, China's never going to end up starving to death," and I was just like, what do you mean by that? And they're like, there's never going to be a mass starvation problem in China. And the reason is it's a modern
go
country.
Back less than 100 years.
Go back less than 75 years. And I made that. I said, dude,
the Great Leap Forward. They estimated something like 20 million Chinese starved to death as a result of it.
80 million. 20 was the original number. Then they went to 40. And then when they got the internal numbers out of China.
I need to read a new book.
Between 40 and 80 million people starved to death in China. And they can go back to that. And actually, up to 10 years, I have a soliloquy. I wrote an essay once that for some reason people found controversial on why I love sweatshops. And the central premise of this was, and I wrote this about 10 years ago, and at the time, children were starving to death at an ungodly rate in China. 1 in 4 of the population was at best food insecure, and a great many of them were starving and or undernourished. What my argument on the sweatshops was really quite simple. I had seen someone who, a Christian woman who said that in the name of God, she was going to close a sweatshop because they had the machine gun nests and all this other stuff. And she closed it, but she didn't bother to ask any of the children who were working there as essentially slave labor if they wanted it closed. If she had asked, they'd have said, no, don't close it. She didn't notice that the machine guns that everybody hears are there to keep people in. They're not. They're to keep people from breaking in. The machine guns are all pointed out, not in. And if the kids want to leave, they can at any time. They choose not to. And there are chains on the bathrooms to keep them from sneaking in there. But if they get caught, they just get thrown out. And someone else takes their place. The reason is because the alternative to working in a sweatshop back then was starving to death. There were hordes of people who were trying to break in to work. If you end a sweatshop, you haven't fixed the problem, which is that they don't have enough money or food and that the economy is such that businesses can get away with this kind of thing because for every person, for every job, there's 20 people that needs that job to live. That's what creates those conditions. And closing a sweatshop sends those people out to starve to death. Period. End of discussion. That's what it does. You want to end sweatshops? It's actually very simple. Free trade with China. We start buying a lot more of their products. They have to produce more. The production goes up. They need to employ more people. And then all of a sudden, when you have more jobs than you have people, that's when they can start demanding things, even in China. And every time I say that, somebody comes up and says, yeah, but it hurts the U.S. economy. Yeah. But we have a strong economy. We'll stay strong. We'll be rich. We'll get cheaper. We're still rich. We'll get cheaper products. Our economy goes down a little bit. In some sectors, a lot. Their economy goes up a lot. If you're a humanitarian, if you want to help the Chinese people, then you want to encourage trade with them and you want to encourage us working with them as much as we can, because despite the fact that, yeah, some jobs are going to vanish because they're going to go to China where they can do stuff like this, you're going to move them out of poverty. It's easy to say I'm going to close a sweatshop. It's tough to say I'm willing to, help invest and do what needs to be done in order to get these people out of poverty. That is all a very long way to say they are headed back there and they can go there again. And I've talked to people, I said that's where they're going. We are looking at Chinese people starving again very soon. It's China. Nobody will allow that to happen.
Yeah, right.
If people didn't allow that to happen, I would not have been able to defensibly write an essay why I love sweatshops. The only reason that statement is defensible is because if it wasn't for the sweatshops, even more children. Parents were sending their children there because if they didn't, they were going to starve. Yeah, there are ways to fix it, but it's not. Yeah. Sorry, what?
Yeah, I was going to say, and the parents were sending them there not just to get the kids fed, but because the kid would then be able to bring home food to the family who would otherwise starve.
Yep. And and the businesses knew it, and the businesses were taking advantage of it. But stopping them from, what do you, shut down the business? That's going to make things worse.
Better to let them starve. We don't want to have, unfair labor practices. That would be bad.
Yep. And I'm aware it's counterintuitive and it sucks, and I'm not endorsing what they're doing. But the problem is an economic one. It's not a moral one. All right, $5, Aaron Colson. The average age of CCP members is 57, 58. What happens when a millennial... Yep. Yeah. What happens? Sorry. I was just like, yeah, I think he's got it. What happens when a millennial and Gen Z CCP member takes control? It's not only that, but right now they're about to have a huge baby boomer problem, and they don't have the people to carry it on the account. I think they are in very big trouble. So any thoughts on the super chat?
All I will say is just wait.
Just wait.
He goes into that.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's right. He does. Yes, he does. So let's go further. We have a $2 super chat from Sinister Porpoise. I hate JavaScript as much as he loves sweatshops. Oh, I just realized I got one saving grace in all of this, which is YouTube does not allow clipping on in time. So otherwise, I'm just going to get I love sweatshops going around all over. Of course, I shouldn't say it because that encourages someone to figure out a way to clip it. But Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, you're worried. You're like, oh, good thing they can't do that, or they would just clip the heck out of me saying, I love sweatshops, and you keep saying it. And you're giving them so many opportunities. Like, no, not only did he say it, but he said it like 12 times.
Our head mod, it does allow clipping on overtime. I may have outthought myself on that one. Yeah, we may need to go down. I think overtime is about to have some technical issues. All right. So thank you very much for the super chats. We really do appreciate it. I'm gonna play this, and I'm gonna be AFK for a little while. I need to find a excuse to kill the stream on overtime before it goes any further. We'll private the stream or something.
That was back in 2019 before we had the everything in shortage economy. Now it's more like 3 to 8 months, but still, order of magnitude better. But not for anyone else. This is where the oil flows. The thicker the line, the more tankers are on that route. This is the route that matters the most. It is a convenient 6,000 to 7,000 mile sail from the Persian Gulf to the Chinese coast. Now, we've all heard those stories about the Chinese having this massive navy, over 600 ships, versus our 290. However, 90% of the Chinese fleet would fit in this auditorium. Not all at the same time, don't be a dumbass. One at a time. They don't have range. If no one's shooting at them, so they can go slow and in a straight line to conserve fuel, they can go 1,000 miles, maybe. Most of them you're talking under 400 under a war scenario, whereas our fleet is entirely blue water. So if there is a real conflict in which the Chinese are involved, someone who does not care for them, and that is a long list these days, is going to put 2 destroyers in the Indian Ocean basin and cut the energy line, and China deindustrializes within a year. All
right, that is a bold claim. We actually kind of discussed that claim when we were talking about the lead up to World War II. Commander, what are your thoughts on this claim?
It depends on how you're defining deindustrializes. And it also depends on whether you mean the entire country, I mean every single, mom and pop small machine shop inside China, or if you're referring to major industries. I think, as you say, it's a very bold claim. I don't think it's supportable unless you start caveating it. And I think that what you end up with is certain enclaves that would survive, maybe see a downturn, but they'd still survive. But yeah, I think the majority of the country would experience really major setbacks.
So it would certainly be a significant problem, but some hyperbole is what it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, but I mean...
Well, it's also not quite as easy as he makes it sound. He's like, oh, just plunk a couple destroyers there in the Indian Ocean, and just completely disrupts everything. It's like, well, a couple destroyers, one, aren't going to be able to chase them all down. Two, you need to be able to support those destroyers. And unless it's India doing this, and most of India's naval fleet, I wish you could see my air quotes, are canoes with radios in them. And ask me how I know. They're literally canoes with radios in them. Anyway, they're, so you have to have the logistical support to support an actual destroyer, and that's not cheap. That is really expensive, and they're very vulnerable, and the rest of the world is going to have a problem with that. So, he says it so flippantly, just plunk a couple of destroyers in there, and it's like, yeah, the U.S. won't allow that. It's like that is a major traffic lane for the United States Navy. They are not going to allow that to happen. And, the U.S. isn't going to allow that to happen. It is not nearly as simple.
Right. I think his posit is that if the West, not necessarily led by the U.S., but with U.S. acquiescence of a sort, decides to impede Chinese oil traffic from the Mideast, then that happens quite easily. And
yeah,
when
the
I
U.S.
say
could
the
drop
West,
a carrier
right,
there.
right. And when I say West, in this case, I'm talking about India as well, because India does have a fleet of note. It's not huge, but it's noteworthy. I mean, they have, I think, at this point, 3 carriers actually.
Well, so I think there are 2 takeaways from this. First of all, China does. China does not. A lot has been made in the past of the size of China's fleet, and what he's suggesting is. I think he said this in another version of the video. It's mostly defensive. A lot of it is still using diesel, meaning that, if a submarine's on diesel, it doesn't have the huge range because it needs to come up, swap out the air, charge the batteries, yada, yada, yada. And it's a small fleet. So the idea that it could operate offensively in any way that could really intimidate the U.S. is not tenable. So that's a very different view than most of us have heard, and I think we agree here that he's probably right about that. And the second takeaway is that their security for oil is actually their supply chain is extraordinarily vulnerable, and if the U.S. did decide to interfere with it, we could do so highly effectively with very little effort, I think is the takeaway. Does that sound fair to everybody here?
I think that's kind of what he's implying, yeah.
All right. And let's see, we have super chat. Okay, Aaron Colson, $20. Thank you again, Aaron. Wow, we've been very generous, so we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's another super chat. Last one from me for the night, and very much appreciate this conversation. Well, thank you. Can you describe what you think the majority Chinese person's the non-wealthy sentiment is of his own government? Wow. I would like to. I have a few thoughts on it, but I am not qualified to say anything that you could take as coming from somebody who knows. So probably better to keep my mouth shut. I wish I could speculate. I could make it sound decent, but I don't have Peter Zeihan's experience in that field. Oh, come on. That was funny. Does anyone have any insight into that?
Insight? I don't know that I would say insight. I don't know if I would say I have insight into it, although in my admittedly non-expertise opinion, the average Chinese person probably doesn't think much of the government at all. They're just trying to get by in their lives and survive, and the government and governmental power is so far out of their purview of daily life that it's something that they may grumble about, but it's not probably really a big impact on their thinking throughout the day. They're probably more concerned with trying to survive.
I can see how people would have that opinion. I will, and this is a little dated, I will admit, but I will bring this up. When we stopped on one of the ships I was on in Hong Kong, this was when relations with the U.S. were warming up. We were allowed to go on tours into China. Now, admittedly, these were guided tours. So you got to take what the tour guide says with a grain of salt. But when we're going on this and they're taking us to this town and they show us, this is the new clinic that we put up. And I'm looking at it going, this is not a clinic. This is basically an empty room with a clean floor and a cabinet that has some bandages in like Tylenol in it. That was the extent. But the way the person said this, and I'm not going to say I'm a great judge of character or anything, but my interpretation was this was legitimate, honest feelings by this person, was with the most profound pride you can imagine. because this was somebody who was brought up under the old regime. And you didn't have a clinic in your town. If you were lucky, if you had party connections, they might put you on a train to the big city where some overtasked intern might get to see you. But here in this little town, for the first time ever, they had this clinic, and they had an actual trained nurse, not, the midwife, but somebody who'd actually been to a university and gotten registered nurse qualifications to staff it. And as I said, this was some time ago. We're talking over 20 years ago. Look at how far many parts of China have come since then. Yeah, it's a walking basket case of corruption, ineptitude, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at the difference of what China is today from what it was when they finally kicked the nationalists over to Taiwan, and it's a night and day difference. They have made enormous progress. Yes, at great cost. Yes, at substantial loss of anything even resembling personal freedom. But the average Chinese person, I think, legitimately looks at this advance that occurred in basically less than 100 years, and they feel pride in that. Would they like changes? Would they like improvements? Would they like something that's less odious as a form of government? Sure. But nonetheless, they can see that what has come about from this form of government has been beneficial to them. That's my interpretation.
That sounds a lot like my experience in Russia as well. Immense pride in yeah. All right. Well, let's continue and see where he goes.
Are the most vulnerable economy on the planet. And that's only the second reason why I don't see the Chinese surviving the decade. Anyway, back to us. Checkbook map again. I think you know where you are. This is the most important cluster of checkbooks in the history of human civilization. Marshalltown, Iowa, where I'm from. Bismarck, North Dakota. Moving on. This is not a frat party. Population of Western North Dakota is what, 12? Yeah. This is not just a bunch of dudes leaving the lights on. Yeah. It's lit up because of a problem with transport. Now, oil's a liquid. You can put it into a container or a rail car or a tanker truck, whatever. Natural gas disperses. And so much natural gas is bubbling up out of the fields as a byproduct that we have to flare it until we can build out the infrastructure to capture it and transport it. And you can see it from space. Which means in the United States, only in the United States, not only is our oil and our gas produced where we live, for us natural gas is a waste product. And waste product economics are brilliant because everyone loves free, right? This is what free looks like. This is Henry Hub. This is our primary natural gas pricing location. We don't have anyone here from the Gulf Coast, do we? Anybody? Yeah, okay. They have these things called hurricanes. And back before 2008, about half of our natural gas was produced in the offshore Gulf. So when a storm would come through, they would have to shut down the platforms and evac them. The storm would rage by, and then they'd have to go back and spend weeks undoing the damage, and that manifested as sustained price increases. But by 2009, the majority of the majority of natural gas in the country was produced onshore in the shale fields. And we don't care what the weather is on shore. So prices went low for a long time. Texans, of course, know what this little spike is. This is what happened last January when Texas got cold. Aw, dropped down to 27. They did not cope well. Prices almost tripled. And this right here, this little thing, this is what we're all bitching about right now. It's like we're nowhere near the 50-year average yet, folks. And yet this has got us ripping our hair out. You guys want to see what the Chinese and the Europeans are bitching about? Because this is so much fun. Europe's already in recession. I don't care what the statistics say. China would be in recession from this if it wasn't that they're probably in recession from the COVID lockdowns. 3 years minimum for this to be fixed, assuming the Ukraine war stops tomorrow. We are looking at not a recession, we are looking at an energy-induced depression that is affecting multiple continents, probably already. But not here. This is a good problem. This gives us a competitive advantage in everything.
All right. I have a decent background in economics. Not enough that I could be considered an expert, enough that I can usually opine somewhat saliently. I tend to think he is right that we're potentially facing an energy problem. It's beyond me to know how confident I could be in all of these claims. Some of his economic claims later will be a little more in my sphere. But having said that, I will say I'm aware he's playing to a very specific audience. That's also why, if he's in Iowa, he's going to hit on Texas, and I get that, and that's perfectly fine. But the energy problem and that spike is a huge problem for a lot of people, and that is the difference between freezing to death and whether or not your family survives in some countries, even some Western countries, is what that spike is. So even if he's completely right on all of it, it would be nice if he could dial it back. It may be a problem that we'd like to have. It isn't true for countries that are genuine friends of ours. And so I get a little troubled by this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I agree.
Could we do better? Oh yeah. Could government policy be more on point? Yes. But the baseline that we're working from is pretty good here. All right. Oh God, I hate this graphic. This is the graphic that gives me nightmares. The deep blue, the deep green, those are the world's major producers and exporters of grain and soy-based calories. Everyone else on the map is a net import. Countries that are in orange and red import at least half of the calories they consume. In a world where the fertilizer system breaks down, we've lost potash because of the Russians, we've lost phosphate because of the Chinese, and because of the natural gas price increases, a lot of Europeans have already stopped producing nitrogen. Here are the places looking at 40% reduction in their ability to grow the crop in the first place.
All right, I'm aware that the sound issues that he's experiencing, despite the fact that he was in Iowa at the time, naturally one might attribute to the producers on In Time. Believe it or not, it's mic problems that he's having on his own. I will say, I think he's once again, he's like, okay, potash, the potash is gone. No, there are other countries that are producing potash. Perhaps the market has suffered a huge hit, but every one of those where I said this is it. No, it's big, but he's really glossing over some serious points here, or some significant exceptions to what he's saying.
This is famine. We will have it again in the fourth quarter of this year. We already know in the United States that a lot of farmers have crop switched away from corn and soy into things like hay that are less input intensive. We already know that in sub-Saharan Africa, they're just not using as much. We won't have an idea of what yields might look like until probably mid-September. That's usually when we get our first good batch of data. It's not enough. We will easily be having 500,000 to 1 billion people this year suffering from malnutrition by year's end, and there's not a single thing going on in the world right now that suggests to me that any of the fertilizer interruptions are going to be solved this year or next year. In fact, I anticipate them all to get significantly worse.
All right, he's absolutely correct about this prediction, but the reason he's correct is because by the time he gave this, those were already the numbers. We've had between 700 million and 1 billion suffering from malnutrition worldwide for the last, I want to say 19 years. So everything that he just said, it depends on what he means by these claims. So I don't know what he means, but by what most people would take these numbers to mean, he's already right, and he was right when he said it, and the numbers haven't changed. They haven't gone up, and when he predicted, I think at one point, 1 billion by the end of the year, or how many he said would be starving to death, the number is lower. The number has not gone up significantly. However, so if he's you want to say he's right, it's only because he's not making a prediction. It was the state of things when he said this. Having said that, I think China is facing starvation. I think if it's going to avoid a return to where it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago with mass starvation and struggling, the likes of which you've never seen before, I don't know how they're going to avoid it. I don't know if that's going to end their government. It didn't last time. So,
yeah. So the other thing that bothers me about this graphic and the way he's talking about it is many of the countries that are in orange, and definitely many of the or most of the red countries, either have been in that condition for forever. I mean, Somalia being a case in point. I mean,
yeah.
How long has Somalia been starving? Since Somalia had people living in it, basically. But other countries like, say, Saudi Arabia or Libya or Algeria or Venezuela down there. Those are countries that had food shortages, certainly, but they import. They're not people starving to death. When was the last time, we had, the Irish potato famine, but you don't see people talking about famine in Ireland right now. But yeah, all of that's food that they're importing. So the map itself is a little deceptive.
Well, and in some areas where there is actual starvation going on, Venezuela, it's not because of the fertilizer shortage.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suspect his claim is going to be that's what's going to push it over the top. It's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is that the map is not fully accurate in conjunction with what he's saying. Mm-hmm. But what he is saying is definitely of serious concern.
Okay, that makes sense. I like it. So the map is being pressed into service in a way that's not appropriate,
right.
But that does all right.
So I'll put it in another way. If we take, say, South Africa, which is green, so it's basically self-sufficient. It doesn't export, but it makes enough to feed itself. And let's assume that because of the fertilizer shortage or whatever, South Africa now has to start importing. That's going to drive the price up.
Yes.
How is that going to impact countries that, even though they've been in the red, aren't starving, say Ireland or Saudi Arabia, when they now have to pay out more money? You see what I'm getting at?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I'm going to take this. I'll be right back.
All right, you go take that. I'm going to mute you there, so he is muted. Somebody in the live chat, just if he starts going, let me know. I've been watching the map, and I'm checking the live chat, but if I forget to unmute him, Xandring, you're muted already. Too? Oh, he's done already? Oh, right. And
good to go.
All right, perfect. I'm also going to mute Xandring, and people in the live chat, if you see him going, don't bother to notify me. I'm going to, that button, I'm going to mute him, and then I'm going to yank the button from the control board. All right. I don't know why I'm so mean. I'm sorry. I love Xandring. He makes this a much better show, and I just have to be mean to him. I'm aware. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop, but All right. So where were we?
Who's to say that being mean to me isn't what makes this a much better show?
I like that. I just want people to know how much I suffer. Xandring's like a brother to me, and I come onto the show, and I have to be mean to him. I don't want to be, but it's ratings, folks. I'm like Peter Zeihan, I know what makes a good show, and it's hard, but I'm willing to bite the bullet.
And it's going to change the production portfolio. Now, every color on here is a row crop, but the brown is exclusively wheat. One of the fun things that happens with globalization is instead of competing within your own county and feeding your own county, you can specialize. You can produce whatever your climate and culture allows for you to do at volume for sending to other places. And in doing that, we stop growing wheat. So if you go back before World War II, the US was a big wheat state. But once globalization happened, we went into corn and soy because we could get more bang for our buck with that, and we pushed wheat to the margins. Wheat is cold tolerant and drought tolerant and heat tolerant. So you grow it where nothing else grows. And when you do that in the industrial age, you're growing the wheat on the margins in places where nothing would grow without those industrial inputs, things like fertilizer and irrigation. If those supply chains break down, not only can you no longer grow wheat there, you have to grow wheat on your better land. And that means the volume of internationally traded agricultural commodities is in the early stages of collapse. But production isn't going to overly change here, because for us, most of the inputs are local. Let's compare that to the big competitor, Brazil. This is Minnesota. Not that far away. Weird people, but not that far away. Winter triggers a soil recharge cycle, aka free fertilizer. The Midwest, for the most part, is prairie soils. Soil being the right word. This is the Brazilian Cerrado. It's tropical savanna. And the way you grow crops in a tropical savanna is you wait for it to rain, you break out your bulldozer, you chain up a tree, you pull it out by the roots, and then you poison the soil for 3 to 20 years until you get rid of the excess acidity. You then are left with something with the consistency and the nutrient profile of beach sand. You can't grow stuff in sand unless you fertilizer the hell out of it. In terms of inputs per calorie produced, Brazil is the second least efficient producer in the world. But in a world of globalized agriculture and globalized inputs, this is a minor detail. Should something happen to the inflows, we have a very different situation. So here's the American.
I'm going to pause really quickly. I just want to show this. Titan, thank you very much for taking the time to get that. That is a hunger map right there of the Earth. I'm not going to stay on that too long because we do want to wrap this up. We don't want to keep the show going too long because we have some time constraints here. But that's it. You should be able to. In fact, I may at some point while this is playing overlay that so you can see it in huge, the full screen. But that's the map as it is. 0.67 billion, so 67. So I was a little shy on the 700 million, but I was close. So yeah, about 700 million people with insufficient food consumption, 17 countries with high levels of hunger. That's the map as it is. Let's get back to Peter Zeihan here, and then we'll if we have a little time, we'll discuss that later. Thank you, Titan.
And fertilizer profile. The big numbers on the left, that's the percentage that's imported. We produce almost all of the nitrogen and phosphate we use. Our problem is potash. But we have Canada. Also weird people. But wow, are they reliable when it comes to commodity production. So we get over 80% of what we need from our northern neighbor. We only have 12% of our total vulnerability to one product that is dependent upon the Russian space. Is it inconvenient? Sure. But we've bitched about less. Here's Brazil. There is no Brazilian agricultural sector without Russian involvement. And Russian involvement is going away. It's the world's largest source of soy exports. And without global soy exports, there is not a global pork industry. Except here. And if we're being nice, Canada too. And folks, that's it. There's no China without this. There's no Spain or Germany without the stuff out of Ukraine. It is that simple, and we are now there. Now, the Brazilians were smart, and as soon as they realized things were getting real over in Ukraine, they forward pushed a lot of imports. They have more than enough for this season, and remember, they double crop. We don't know yet if they have enough for the next one in this year. They certainly aren't going to have enough for 2023. Catastrophic reductions in yield because these are not prairie soils. Without those inputs, there is nothing. There's only one competitor to keep an eye on. That's Argentina. Very similar climate to the Midwest, a little bit drier, but same deep prairie soils that we have here. Their problem as well is going to be getting the fertilizer. But this is a country that is already a significant exporter of soy and to a lesser degree corn. And if you're looking for simplicity, you want to produce the inputs that you need for your animal protein. Argentina is the only place out there that can now do that at scale, theoretically. Now, I'm sure you guys have all Argentina, really? Argentina? They have made every wrong choice that you possibly can in the last 90 years, and it shows. I don't mean to suggest that this is inevitable, and it's certainly not imminent. I'm saying it's the only really one to watch for. Now, as you all know, it's not just about inputs, it's also about hygiene, and hygiene is largely an issue of experience, technology, and above all, capital. And the Argentinians have had to import all of their capital for most of the last 50 years. And they're not alone. This is net worth. As you age, your net worth increases. At first, you're spending everything on your kids and your cars and your college and your home. But as you move into your 40s, the kids are moving out, and the house is getting paid down. And that last decade before you retire, you're at the peak of your earning, and your expenses have dropped. And that makes you the wealthiest you will ever be for your life. And then you retire, and you liquidate your stocks and your bonds, and you go into T-bills and cash, because you won't be able to take the pain of a currency correction or a market crash. You will never have income again, and so if you keep everything engaged and the market falls, you're destitute. Can't afford it, have to go conservative. It's pretty normal. Now historically, that hasn't really mattered, because until we industrialized in the 1950s, this is what our demographic profile looked like. Children's at the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top.
That's roughly true on the economics. I mean, there's still like he's talking but yeah.
Well, I was going to say, these pyramids are where it starts getting really interesting.
Oh, yes.
Men on one side, women on the other. And the sliver up there in the early 60s, it's small. It's always been small. Historically speaking, back to the dawn of humanity, it's small. And there have always been more people in their 50s than their 40s. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. There have already been more people in their 50s than their 60s, in their 40s than their 50s. And so if a small group leaves and a larger group is coming up behind, it's the same ratio each and every year. But when we industrialized and urbanized and globalized in the 50s and 60s, that changed. Because when you live on the farm, especially pre-industrial, kids are free labor. You have a lot. My mom's here, what do you have, 37 brothers and sisters? Yeah. But globalization and industrialization means urbanization, because people move into the cities to take value-added services and manufacturing jobs. And so when my mom moved into town, she went from being one of 37 to having 3 kids. Because when you move into town, kids are no longer free labor. They are very loud. They are very annoying. They are very expensive mobile pieces of furniture. And adults aren't dumb. Most adults aren't dumb. Here's us. We've all heard, that blah, 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 the baby boomers, how are we going to afford their retirement? That's legitimate. But it's from a capital point that I'm really concerned. They're the largest generation we've ever had. They're moving into retirement. On average, the boomers retire in the 4th quarter of this year. We are almost there. And they're taking all of their money with them. They're going to lock it into very uninteresting things like T-bills, and they will stay there until they pass on, which on average will not be this decade. So we know that the velocity of capital isn't simply going to slow or stop, it is going to go into screaming reverse. And the cost of capital has to increase by at least a factor of 4 in the next 12 calendar months. The fact that we're going through an economic tightening cycle at the same time is just bad luck. It's going to magnify everything. Capital has never been this cheap, and it never will be this cheap again. So if you need to borrow for anything for the next 20 years, like, go do it. Like right now, they're recording this. You can watch it later, because you will never have this opportunity again. That's the capital thing. There's also a workforce thing. So boomers, largest generation we've ever had, retiring this year.
I'm going to pause it really quick. We've actually only got, I think, a little more than 10 minutes left, but I want to point out he's giving financial advice. It's half joking. He's serious about it, but he's not a financial advisor. And I'll just point out, if he had a license to give financial advice, what he just said could cost him his license. That's a a rather bold and reckless statement. So the only reason he can make that statement is because he's not licensed to make that statement, which is an odd position to be in. There's no consequences for him to say something like that, and there is, as most of the stuff, some truth to what he's saying, but please don't just go out and buy, don't just invest your life in what he's saying here.
That is the single largest factor behind the inflation that we're feeling right now, labor inflation. Because this generation, the Zoomers, the young bucks that are coming up from below, they're the smallest generation we've ever had. In calendar year 2022, that is a shortage of 400,000 workers. And that will increase each and every year for the next 12 until we peak in 2034 with a shortage of 900,000. Only then will it start to get bigger or better. And we know that's exactly where it's going to go, because all the baby boomers are here. They've been here since 1965. We know exactly how many there are. And the Zoomers, they've all been here for a few years too. We know exactly what the inflows and the outflows into the market look like for the next 20 years. It's not great. But it is so much worse elsewhere. Here are the big four economies of the world: the Europeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and us.
Something really quick.
Yeah.
Before he gets into the rest of the world, he talks about a worker shortage of 400,000 increasing to 2035 to 900,000, and conveniently leaves out that for the last couple of years, we've had over 1 million people entering the United States. So that doesn't seem to be much of a problem.
He does address that.
Does he?
All right.
I don't remember that.
I will caveat that by saying he may not address it in this one, but in the more recent version of this that I saw, he does talk about that.
And he's given, for those of you he gives roughly the same thing, and he tells the same jokes most of the time, which is, by the way, perfectly fine. I'm not going to give him a hard time for that. There is something to be said for showmanship. I have seen people who were geniuses who had information that I thought everybody needed to know, but because they didn't know how to present well, nothing came of them, or information that I thought was highly valuable. And unfortunately, there are people who are great showmen and vacuous otherwise. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but he's a skilled showman, and that's actually an important skill to have. So,
bottom two were terminal 20 years ago. When your birth rate changes and you start having fewer kids, it doesn't manifest immediately. But if you do it for 60 years, it's not that you've run out of children. You ran out of children 40 years ago. You're running out of adults now. And we're looking at mass retirement across the world. Now, there is something very different about the American demography, and it's right here. We know them as millennials.
That is, I did check with Department of Human Services. What was it? That is the correct sound to make when discussing millennials. I don't think there's ever been any real disagreement on that, and I completely concur.
I just threw up on my mouth a little bit. American boomers did one thing that none of their cohorts in the rest of the world did. They had kids. And, we can talk all day about the millennials, and oh, can I? But they have one thing going for them that their equivalent around the world does not have going for them. Here, they exist. They're consuming today. They will be investing in a few years. They are the light at the end of the tunnel. Now let's talk about China. Here's the number one reason why you should not expect to be selling anything to China by the end of the decade, perhaps as early as next year. That demographic structure was already the world's fastest aging workforce as of January of 2000. This is already well past the point of terminal collapse. If they were going to fix this, they missed it by 30 years. We now know that this data is wrong. The Chinese have completed their 10-year census. They're starting to release the data in bits and pieces, not all at once because it's really bad. And they're now publicly admitting that they overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people, all of whom were born since the one-child policy was adopted, so people 40 and under, and the vast majority of whom were women because of selective sex abortions applied en masse. The yellow bars probably don't exist. We don't have an economic theory that suggests that that leads to anything but full-scale societal collapse. It's just a question of whether it happens in 2029 or 2023. And when I look at the energy situation, and I look at the Ukraine war, and I look at the import disruptions and the flows and nationalism and Trump and Biden and all the rest, I gotta say, it's looking like it's going to be sooner rather than later. When I speak to pork groups for the last few years, I've been telling you, if you bet the farm on sales to China, you will lose the farm. That doesn't mean there's no hope. It does mean you need to look elsewhere, like these four. Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico, Colombia, these are your markets of the future. Vietnam is already the world's most pork-hungry country, eating more per person than any country in the world, including China. And there's over 120 million of them. Indonesia, 260 million people, nominally Muslim. They still like pork. Southeast Asia is like weirder than America. Mexico, likely to be the fastest growing economy in the world for the next 30 years. We have the healthiest demography in the advanced world. They have the healthiest demography in the advanced developing world. Courtesy of Donald Trump, we are linked together with NAFTA too. There are a lot of things about Trump I'm not a fan of. That was a stroke of genius. Thank God.
No, even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And yeah, they may have the fastest growing economy, but the problem is that he's making it sound like that's going to mean that they're going to have a strong economy and they're going to have a lot of money and be able to contribute significantly to a modern Western economy. And that doesn't mean that. The fastest growing economy from a really bad economy still may be a bad economy by the time you're done.
It wasn't just negotiated, it's implemented, folks. It's done. And one word, carnitas. Nom, nom, nom. It's like, I gave a presentation to like poultry farmers of America a few years ago. Like, if you can get the Mexicans into Thanksgiving, I mean, what about Thanksgiving does not sound Mexican? Family gathering with food. I mean, come on. It's like, this is a low carry here, people. Because of the breakdown of global trade, North America broadly needs to double the size of its industrial plant in a very short period of time. Mexico is part of that solution. And Mexican farmland is awful. They need to import about a third of their food. Where do you think they get it from? And then finally, Colombia. The biggest problem that Mexico faces is that there's just not enough of them. There's only 130 million people in the country, and we're losing roughly a 1 billion person workforce out of China. Mexico can't do it all. They need some help. Colombia is the country most likely to help. So Colombia, top 5 list for fastest growing economies for the next 30 years. We already have an FTA with the Colombians. So this is your replacement plan. If you are not selling to these countries, find a way. They all like pork too, so that's that. Okay, final slide. This is CPI. The Americans and the Canadians, sibling countries, very similar. It tracks as you would expect. There have been 3 big phases for inflation since World War II. First, the original post-war build-out. This is when most of what we consider to be the advanced world fully industrialized. Remember, we didn't finish this process in the United States until the 60s. This is roads, this is power plants, this is asphalt, this is electrical grids. Industrial, demand-driven inflation. Then we had the baby boomers come of age. Houses, cars, kids. Consumer-driven demand inflation. And then we had this glorious period that we all think of as normal. The Soviet system collapsed, and an empire's worth of raw commodities was dumped on global markets, whether it was oil and gas, or wood, or wheat, or aluminum. Kept prices low for a generation. And the Chinese entered the global system in 1989, 1 billion workers, pushing down the cost of manufactured goods. We had 30 years of the lowest inflation ever recorded in human history. It is not normal. And it's ending. The Chinese labor is going away. The Russian commodities are going away. And we have to deal with a double spike now. Because while the baby boomers are retiring, the millennials are here. And they're in the prime of their consumption years. And we need to double the size of the industrial plant in the next 5 years. Every disinflationary trend we have benefited from in the last generation is flipping. And every inflationary trend we have dealt with in the last 2 generations is coming back on steroids. Your mid-case scenario should be inflation of 9 to 15% for at least the next 5 years. Now, I realize that's kind of a but it will likely also be paired with the fastest economic growth we have seen in this country in decades. There's not a lot that the government can do to make this easier. There is a lot the government can do to make it worse. And when I look at who we've elected the last 3 times, I can't say I'm overly confident there. But your sector produces the thing we can't live without. I don't care what happens with government policy when it comes to agriculture, because the macroeconomic, the secular, the demographic, the geopolitical trends that are hitting the rest of global agriculture are devastating and they cannot be adapted to. Here you don't face any of that. So, starting later this year, you're going to look out at the world and you're going to see famine and you're going to feel really bad. And then you're going to change a few things because you're going to try to feed the world and you're going to fail. You don't have enough of a lever and the problem's too big. And you're going to go downtrodden and then you're going to look at your bank statement. And then you're just going to laugh. You're going to have to put your heart in a safe deposit box. But you are looking at the fastest expansion in farm incomes per person and per acre that we have ever seen in this country's history, and it will last for at least the remainder of this decade. It is not a straight line from here to there. But I think you'll cope. Okay, if you're looking for something to throw at your neighbor.
The only thing that I want to go back to one thing, and somebody had mentioned this, and I think either I'm conflating this with a different one, or I just don't remember. But I did want to put this video up here. If you take a look at the China on the right, you'll see that there's the yellow stars, there's the red lines, but the lines are actually yellow at the ends on that particular map there. And he had said this, I don't know if it was cut from this version or if I'm conflating versions. Somebody pointed this out in the live chat. Those yellow lines are what we've learned doesn't exist. So it previously up through those yellow lines was thought to be real, and so that map of remove the yellow in those lines at the bottom, and that's what it's actually like. So all right, having said, yep.
The thing that I think is interesting about that he doesn't mention is when you get a swing that severe, it has echoes that will continue for generations to come.
I'm conflicted. He said that, put your heart in, and again, and I think this was something you had said earlier and is extremely important. He was paid to come and give a talk, and to some extent a pep talk to pig farmers in Iowa. That's what he's here to do. I've done gigs like that. And you put the best possible spin on it you can for that audience. That's part of what you've been asked to do.
Sure.
You do that within the bounds of what telling them the truth. And so that's what he's done. It struck me as somewhat callous, even keeping all of that in mind. But I would like to blunt some of the people who sit there and say, "Oh my God, how can he?" Well, he's talking to pig farmers and who are worried about their futures and trying to say how and why. But all of this gets right back into
I'm not so much saying that. Yeah, I think he was a little callous at some of these things, but I'm talking specifically about that demographic breakdown there on China, with that sudden change of, we thought it was this, but it's really this, because that major change means that it's going to echo as generations progress through, where there simply aren't going to be enough Chinese women to produce replacement generations. And it's going to continue to just skew all out of proportion. And that social disruption is already being felt. And you have to remember that Chinese society is very traditional minded, and there's this whole thing about, and this is why they were aborting all the female fetuses, of perpetuating the family name. You don't have to be royalty to worry about that. I mean, even some little pig farmer, literally, is concerned about preserving his family's name. And right now, you've got perhaps 30 to 40% in some estimates of Chinese men, young men, who are coming to the realization that because of government policy, they will never be able to continue their family's name. And it's at the same time, it's flipped the role thing, where it used to be female offspring were simply commodities. You sold them to other families. They were a burden on you. It was your male children that were going to provide for you in your old age, et cetera, et cetera. Now, female kids are, everybody wants to introduce you to their daughter, or introduce their son to your daughter, to hopefully find a mate so that the family name can continue, kind of thing. And so, all of that societal, cultural disruption going on at the same time that all these things he's talked about is going to hit. I don't think he's necessarily overstating the case that China could very well dissolve. I mean, we'd go back to something akin to the Seven Kingdoms period in Chinese history with, little warlords. And it hasn't been that far in the past that we had that kind of thing, because we had, the Warring States period, and then we have the warlords when we have the Chinese Republic period. All of that together is just crazy. So we could easily see major disruption out there. And as we've talked about many times, whenever the government sees itself under threat, one of the first things it does to try to distract the people from their own inadequacy is to find an external threat to point them at.
Well, and they've certainly been engaging on Ukraine, and there's been some issues, of course, with Taiwan. Do you think that we can count on a more aggressive China in the near future?
I won't say we can count on it, but I will say it in terms of, I don't think we should be surprised.
It's something we should watch for.
Yeah.
All right, Zandring, any other thoughts there?
Yeah, they've kind of dug themselves a hole, China anyway, with their population demographics, and it's not like people didn't see this coming. I mean, I can remember 20 years ago people criticizing China's one-child policy is like that's the worst response to a supposed overpopulation problem that hasn't actually materialized yet. So, I mean, there's been lots of people that have pointed out that this is something that's probably going to happen, and the skewing of the males versus females, and just the collapsing, number of workers. And he's like, he keeps saying, I guess he's trying to be as noticed as possible. He's trying to, it's essentially like clickbait. He's like, okay, well, China's just not going to exist. And it's like, well, no, that's not true. I mean, there have been lots and lots and lots of global empires that have collapsed. They're still here today. The British Empire, I mean, China's collapsed several times. Japan, the Empire of Japan collapsed. Well, actually, we blew them up and they surrendered and then collapsed. But we rebuilt them. There's been lots of, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. It's like, but all those people are all still there. They just changed what they were doing. What he's specifically talking about is he doesn't think that China is going to be a global economic power in the coming future, and they're going to start succumbing to a lot of their own problems that are going to take them out of that. And we're starting to see a lot of that happening now with onshoring or nearshoring in the United States. There's a lot of things. It's like you used to pick up a pair of Wrangler jeans or their cargo pants, and it would say, made in China or someplace in Asia. Now they're made in El Salvador, I think it is.
Yep.
So there's been a lot of manufacturing that has been at the very least nearshored. You're also seeing, at least I'm seeing, maybe it's because I'm looking and maybe there's a bit of bias there, but I'm also seeing a lot more commodities and just consumables that are being produced in the United States. I'm seeing a lot more companies. Origin, for example, has popped up. Origin, Maine. They're making boots, they're making jeans, and their jeans are all U.S. products. It's the cotton from Texas. The thread is made right there. It's all sewn together and manufactured right there in Maine. They're hella expensive still, but I'm seeing a lot more of these companies. Sanctified Supply Company is making things like bags and stuff. And so I'm seeing a lot more of these companies of making all American stuff popping up. And even in the areas where they're not necessarily still made in the United States, you're starting to see a lot more, especially Central American and Mexican made stuff. So,
and you're also seeing hybrid stuff.
Yes. So yeah,
that's
is
been around for quite a while too, and a lot of people don't realize that it's stuff that's partially assembled in, say, Mexico, and then brought back into the U.S. for final assembly, so that you can put a sticker on it that says "Made in the U.S." Except it really wasn't, but part of it was. But regardless, the key is that increasingly there's much less of it that's coming from Asia than used to be the case. And you're dead accurate on that.
Yeah, and especially over the last 3 years, I've been seeing an acceleration of that. I said, no, I don't think any. There's another one that just popped up. I think in 2020 it started. They make socks, and they're in, I think, Louisiana. Why can't I remember the name? Anyway, doesn't matter. I'm seeing a lot more, especially in things like clothing. I mean, it used to be go find a piece of clothing made in the United States. Go into Walmart, find a single piece of clothing in that store that's made in the United States. And it's like, well, in Walmart specifically, you probably still won't find a single piece of clothing made in the United States in Walmart, but you will find a bunch of stuff that's now made in Mexico and El Salvador and Guatemala. So, it's getting a lot closer. And of course, one of the things that he's talking about in this series is the collapse of globalization, and that we're moving back more to a mercantile system or a regional control system.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all right. So I think for me, I have become more and more convinced that Russia will not survive, at least as the country of Russia will not. Well, I would be very shocked if 10 years from now Russia still exists in the way that it does now. My hope is any change would be a significant improvement. Who knows? I'm a toss-up, and I think that when it comes to China, I would not be surprised if the People's Republic of China, if the PRC still existed 10 years from now. I would not be surprised. It's actually they've suffered a lot and held together. So I would not be surprised. On the flip side, I also would not be surprised if the PRC dissolved and a whole other government took over, and if China was something else. So I do agree with the overall assessment that if you are betting on the success of China operating for another 10 years, I don't know that they're going to necessarily collapse within this decade, but I think it's in our lifetimes, and I think it's sooner rather than later if it's going to happen. And if you're betting on it not happening, that would be unwise. I don't have his confidence that it's a foregone conclusion, but they have got serious problems, and the problems are absolutely, especially in total, I think existential for the People's Republic. So, and I think that's about my view. Does that sound fair, Ol?
Yep.
That's fairly fair. I mean, it's a real strong, look at this from an academic. He made a specific comment. I didn't want to stop it just for that one comment, but he made the comment, it really is that simple. And every time I hear him say that, I'm like, no, it really isn't that simple. As a matter of fact, it's vastly more complicated than you're leading on here. So I want to point out that it's on paper, academically, all of these things come in, but the world is far more complicated than the analysis that he's putting forth, and there are so many things that can come out of left field. It's maybe China does disappear because H5N1 wipes out 90% of their population. I mean, there's something like that could come out of left field and upset absolutely everything. So the real world is not that nice, not that tidy, and it is unimaginably complicated with all of the different factors that end up coming into play. So it's and the fact that just because he says, oh, well, they're not going to be here, and I'm like, yeah, actually they probably will be there, just maybe not exactly in the same way that they are right now. Yeah. Like I said, the British Empire collapsed. There are so many empires that have collapsed, and yet they're still around. Britain's still here. They're just not quite the same as they were in the 1600s. So,
well, it's not the British Empire; it's Britain,
right?
And I think that's a possibility. You also get things like, Sudan breaking up into Sudan and South Sudan, or Czechoslovakia breaking into Czechia and the Slovak Republic, and so on. Slovakia. And those kind of things happen. And I think China does have enough internal differences in terms of culture, language, and that's a big one, that I can envision a case, culture, but I can envision a case where it breaks up into component parts. It's still going to be distinctly Chinese, but it won't be the People's Republic, the grand unified idea.
All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So, Jacob Taylor, we know what you meant exactly. So, all right. Well, thank you all. Thank you all. The live chat was very busy, and no, I did not mean to insult all millennials. I just loved. I'm sorry. I love to hit soft targets. That's why I'm making fun of his Andring all the time. So thank you all for joining us. As I said before, like, subscribe, and share. I think we did a great breakdown here, and I would like to very much thank Commander McMillan and 𝐒𝐨𝐮𝐭𝐭𝐞𝐫 for joining me for this. So thank you, gentlemen, both. I think it was a good show, and you were hugely helpful.
Thank you.
So
fun to go in there. And hey, if anybody just doesn't have enough drama in their life, just take this whole show and go find somebody like, I don't know, maybe a Trump supporter, and get them to watch it. Share it with them. You really need to see this. They're really good. They praise Trump in this. So get them to watch it, and you can start a little drama in your life. And if you don't have enough, I could help with that.
We got some good compliments on the last one too. I know there was a guy who was a huge fan and sort of felt that this guy was sort of the voice of God. And my hope is that they don't sit there and say he's an idiot and he doesn't know what he's talking about, but that they put some grains of salt there on it and realize he's preaching to a crowd, and you have to just double check the things he says. So, and there's nuance that he ignores. At any rate, thank you, gentlemen, all, and join us on the Discord, and you will find a few links to also our previous show. Our previous show is also on both In Time and Overtime. You'll find where you've been covering a lot of information. We are anticipating the impeachment of, the indictment of Trump. We've talked about how and why. We've been covering that mostly on In Time, so make sure that you're on the In Time show if you want to keep up with that. If and when he gets indicted, we'll probably cover that on both channels because it ruins Titan's day and because it's big enough that I think it should be covered. So short of that, we are next going to have Commander McMillan and myself will be doing Downtime and just chatting, and that will be on Thursday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. We're going to have Operator Starsky, and we will be discussing the latest going on in Ukraine. Next week, we have a couple of different shows that we are working on, and we are trying to settle on what's going to be scheduled when. We may or may not do another Zeihan video. There's one or two I'm interested in, but I do think we've also covered the topic well. So if there's something that he's said that we believe there could be more value in covering it, we'll cover it. If not, we will be doing other things. And we do have some other things that we're working on. Join us on the Discord and keep up with all of that. Thank you all. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you one last time to Commander McMillan and his Andring. And I hope you all have a marvelous night. And we look forward to seeing you, if nothing else arises, Thursday for Downtime. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Take care. Thanks.